If you're a regular Geek's Guide to the Galaxy listener, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And I want to give a special thank you to Real Misery in the Netherlands, who just gave us this 5-star review. It says, I have no idea how I came across Geek's Guide earlier this year. It has very quickly become my favorite show. I've discovered many brilliant authors that I hadn't heard of before. One that comes to mind is Ada Palmer, interviewed in episode 495. What a genius writer. It doesn't stop with new authors. The discussions about various series and movies are incredibly informative, often hilarious. David Barr Kirtley is so well read, I learned something from every show. Also appreciate the efforts of John Joseph Adams and the regular panelists. I'm working through the backlog, on to episode 475 as I write this. So big thanks again to Real Misery for that great review. Alright, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 559 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing Frank Herbert's classic novel Children of Dune, the third book in the Dune series. And we previously discussed the first two books back in episodes 417 and 537, so definitely check those out if you missed them. And this will include spoilers for everything in Children of Dune, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 33rd appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown. And she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Dave.
The next up, we've got Matthew Kressel, making his 32nd appearance on the show. His novel Queen of Static, the follow-up to his groundbreaking novel King of Shards, is available now, and he recently launched a newsletter of writing advice over at outerdeep.substack.com. Together with Ellen Datlow, he hosts the monthly Fantastic Fiction reading series in New York City. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Always good to be here.
And also joining us today is Rajan Khanna, making his 23rd appearance on the show. He's the author of the post-apocalyptic novels Falling Sky, Rising Tide, and Raining Fire, and his short fiction appears in magazines such as Analog, Lightspeed, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. His articles have appeared on Tor.com and LitReactor.com. So, Raj, welcome to the show.
Happy to be back.
Okay, so let's start off with Andrea, and have you tell us about your expectations going into Children of Dune.
Well, you know, as we've talked about in all our other panels on the Dune books, you know, I read Dune when I was 14, and it meant quite a bit to me. One of the books that made me want to be a writer. And then the next book, which I I stole it from my brother immediately after finishing Dune. And I recall from when I was a kid not being happy with it, that it was much more morose and sad, and lost that heroic epicness about that was Dune. And when we read it again for our last panel, it bore out. It was, I think what we talked about was that the story's good, but it's just the execution wasn't good. So I wasn't, what I could remember about this book, when I read it when I was 14, was that it was better, but I still didn't like it. Reading it now, it's actually excellent book. It's like shockingly good. And I think the reason I hated it when I was a kid was that it's not a happy ending. It's a tragedy. And specifically, you know, one of my favorite characters was Alia, and seeing what happens to her is really heartbreaking. So I came into it with lowered expectations and came out thinking this is one of the best books I've read this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I went into this with sort of rock bottom expectations because I didn't like Dune Messiah that much, and sort of the online stuff I read indicated that the fourth book, God Emperor of Dune, is really the good one, the good sequel, and that the third book, Children of Dune, is maybe just one that you need to read to kind of set up God Emperor of Dune, but on its own isn't maybe that great. I don't know if did you have any sense, Andrea, of kind of what the sort of consensus view of the sequels was?
I don't like going into a book with other people's expectations. But once I finished it, I did go and read some of the commentary on it, like the Dune Wiki. People seem to think it's something you just have to get through, which I did not understand. I just, everybody's got their own opinion. And, after the last panel, I did get some pushback from people in DMs telling me I didn't know what I was talking about. People seem to really love Dune Messiah, and I don't quite understand why. But, let's see if I get pushback on this one. Other people don't seem to be of the same opinion.
You might get pushback on this actual
I'm
podcast.
guessing from the tone of voice, I'm guessing I'm going to, which is fine. I love a good fight.
No, but that's cool that you liked it, though. I always, it's always nice when people are excited about the stuff that we're talking about, even if I'm, hypothetically speaking, not one of those people. But how about Matt? What were your expectations going into Children of Dune?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned on the previous panel that I first read the books about 20 years ago and read the first book in a fugue. And all I really remembered about Children of Dune was the sand trout glove. I think that's probably the most visual image in this that most people remember. When I was talking to someone recently about the Dune books, and they're like, "Oh, is that the one, where Leto turns into the worm?" And I was like, "Yeah." So, like Andrea, I kind of went in with maybe a bit lower expectations, because Dune Messiah to me I had very similar feelings. I think that the ideas were good, but the execution was flawed. And so I went into this not expecting it to really pull me in the same way. And I found myself at times just blown away by how deep and resonant and powerful the ideas are, and just the depth of thought that Herbert put into this, and just going back and reviewing all the plot threads and how they fit together and how he had to plan that from the beginning, and just the philosophical undertones of it. So I have to admit, there were times where it wasn't an easy read, right? So there were times where I had to stop and reread a passage because I'm like, wait a minute, there's so many different levels that are going on in this passage that I need to reread it to make sure I really understand what's going on. And so, at times that wasn't conducive to immersive reading, but the sections that pulled me in the most were so vivid and so real in my mind. And I may have mentioned this on the first Dune podcast with the first book, is I almost feel like Herbert himself is taking spice and seeing the future of humanity. I mean, this book feels real. It feels like it's a lived in world. It feels like this is something, when you read this book, you experience it along with the characters, and it is so vivid and so real in my mind. I think it's as good as the first book. I think it's you need to read the first two books to get here, but it is absolutely as good. And there are some themes in this one. I know, Raj. I feel like it's good that we have someone that disagrees with us, so we can.
I agree with that 100%. That it's as good as the first book, 100%.
Yeah. So I find that some of the ideas are even greater than the ideas presented in the first book, and I'm super excited to now read, the next book, The God Emperor, right? Because I just feel like, oh, we just set that up. I need to find out what happens to humanity next.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I guess I forgot to say I'm reading this for the first time, so I think everybody else had read this years ago, but I was coming to this totally fresh. So just to get that out there. And so then, Raj, what were your expectations?
Well, I mean,
coming into
this
Children of Dune.
I didn't read it quite as young as Andrea, as I think we've covered before, but this is where I tapped out the first time because I got like maybe a quarter of the way through and was like, this isn't for me. And I put it away until recently. And I actually will say, I think I went into it with an open mind, thinking coming off of, the last book and actually getting more out of the last book than I think I did the first time. I thought, oh, maybe maybe I'll feel differently about it. And maybe I've matured as a reader or something like that. But I won't say I hated it because I didn't hate it, but I have a lot of problems with it. And they're very specific problems, I think. And there's a lot of stuff in here in the book that I like. But I just found, especially the opening, a slog. It didn't really pick up for me until halfway through. And I think I just question a lot of his choices. I think I agree with Matt that I think the world is great and he, continues to develop it, and his ideas about how things, progress and the future and all that kind of stuff, I think is fascinating and is kind of remarkable. But I think as in the execution for me, it just doesn't work. And it kind of, I'll just say overall, I thought, I had a reason to finish it, right? So I went through it, and it, like I said, I got engaged sort of toward the middle of the book, and I was like, okay, maybe, this is where it happens. And then it lost me again at the end. So, I guess it's like a sine curve, what my interest was in this book. But so again, I don't want to say it's garbage. It's not, but I just didn't connect with it very much at all.
Yeah, I mean, I also had a hard time getting through this book, and I'll agree with everybody that I think Frank Herbert is a genius when it comes to world building. I mean, this is possibly the greatest world building of any science fiction novel that I'm familiar with. And so when it comes to the world building and when it comes to the ideas, this is just absolutely first rate, brilliant, brilliant stuff. But I get bored reading his stuff. So that's kind of, my issue is that I can admire the ideas in the world building, but the characterization and the pacing don't work quite as well for me. It's interesting though, Rush. I mean, but like I said, I went into this with rock bottom expectations, but I actually found the first third of the book, I was really, really enjoying it. And then I found the middle to be a gigantic slog, and then it kind of picked up for me again toward the ending. So it sounds like we had almost exactly opposite.
Well, what I find interesting about the first third is that there's really no action. It's all people talking. It's people talking. It's Ganima and Leto talking to one another. It's, Alia talking to whoever. It's Jessica talking. You see people moving around, but there's no actual movement. There's no kinetic energy of any sort until I think that's where it changed for me in the middle, or at least maybe there's certain characters that come in. Like, I honestly found Leto to be so far into his navel that I just couldn't engage with him at all. I mean, I get he's supposed to be sort of this, he's messed up because he was born with all this knowledge and he's 10 years old, but I didn't care about him at all. So when it was when Duncan showed up and when Jessica showed up and that kind of stuff started happening, and even Faradin, who I thought was really interesting, those people I was like, oh, okay, I can get into these storylines, but there's just a lot of talking of vague futures and vague plans that you don't find out until much later. And I'm like, who is this for? It didn't really even make me excited when I figured it out or when they reveal it at the end. I mean, granted, I'll say that the worm stuff is interesting. That's, the armor and here it alludes to, but I felt again, you said it, Dave, the pacing, it's sort of I feel a lot of this stuff gets revealed right before it becomes relevant, and it could have been kind of woven throughout a little bit better. And there's a lot of playing coy, I felt, with the reader, oh, I'm going to talk about this stuff and, nobody else knows. And that bugged me. So
I will agree that Herbert plays coy a lot, because he'll allude to stuff in some of the characters' dialogue that the reader, like you said, doesn't become aware of until hundreds of pages later sometimes. And the first time through, it's like, what are they talking about? What are they alluding to? And then when you go back and read it, you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what he was talking about. He knew this from the beginning. And that's why I think it's brilliant. I do agree that there were parts that were slow. Some of this reminded me of the problems that I had with Dune Messiah. Dune Messiah had the exact problem that you had, Raj, where it was just characters sitting around talking, not a lot happening. But I feel in this one, for me, it was more of just, Herbert had to set up the chessboard, right? He had to put all the pieces in their place for the game to play, for the action to happen. And yeah, it's not as like I guess action packed in the sense of the first book, where you have the storm of all storms and the worms sieging Arrakeen. It's more of a quieter ending, but I feel in some ways it's more effective because it's that quieter ending that it has such powerful repercussions for the future of humanity.
Well, it's a tragic ending.
It's a tragic ending, but it's tragic for the people who are going to have to live those 4,000 years, and it's tragic for Leto II. But for the people that live after that 4,000 years, at least according to what Leto is saying, they'll actually be the first humans that are free in human history. And that is like the opposite of a tragedy, right? So,
but
okay, yeah. Let's not get into the ending just yet.
Hand slap.
Actually, let me actually just set up the beginning before we get too deep into this. So in the last book, we were introduced to Leto and Ganima Atreides, who are the twin children of Paul Atreides, who's like the Kwisatz Haderach, the superpowered guy who can see the future and everything. And I think, as Raj mentioned, because of the circumstances of their birth, they were like basically born with all the memories of everyone, of all their ancestors. And so all of their ancestors kind of like live inside their minds, and they're in constant danger of one of these ancestors kind of taking over and, getting in the driver's seat and suppressing their like actual identity. And this has already happened to their aunt, Alia, the sister of Paul, who has, so Paul Atreides went off into the desert supposedly to die, and his sister became kind of like the emperor of the Imperium. But she has actually succumbed to one of the personalities inside her head, who is the villain from the first book, the Baron Harkonnen. And so as the story opens, Jessica, the mother of Paul, has come back to Arrakis. She's been away on their home planet of Caladan for the last 20 years. And so she's come back, and sort of a bunch of events are in motion. The deposed family of the old emperor, the Carino family, they're plotting to assassinate Leto and Ganima and install their heir, Faradin, in place. Or I guess they must be. Wait, how are they going to? Now I'm confused, because Ali is the one who's actually in charge. They must be planning to get rid of her somehow too.
But she's regent.
Right.
She's not
like
emperor.
He's right. Like Faradin is technically heir to the to the throne.
So Ollie's going to have to step aside sooner or later.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. So Andrea, anything else right at the beginning that we should set up in terms of just the basic plot, what's going on with the characters and everything?
I mean, there's this talk of the preacher and whether or not he's Paul. And there's, to pick up on what everybody else was talking about, it being slow and having to reread it. It's like, this is a very philosophical book, much more than Dune was. And when you read philosophy, there's a lot of going back and rereading to try to understand it. It's specifically vague because it wants to make you think. And that's what this book does. It makes you think. And I think, and I could be wrong. I have not reread Dune since we read it, a couple of years ago. But it seems to me that the beginning of Dune also is a lot of people talking. And it doesn't really pick up.
I commented on that at the time.
Yeah.
Until they go to... Yeah.
Until they attack. And then they have, and the escape, Paul and Jessica's escape. And then it really picks up with action. So I think he's doing the same things in Dune in this book as he did in Dune. I don't know why it would seem to anybody else that this was different and dragged more. Because it seemed to be the same.
Let me tell you, and I don't have a problem with people talking, but I do have a problem with people talking when I don't understand what their motivations are. And that was like by far and away my number one problem with this book, is that I found it constantly frustrating that I didn't know whether people, like, what side is this person on? What do they actually want? Are they a double agent? Are they, telling the truth in the scene, or are they hiding something? And it's just like, and I'm okay with a couple characters where you're not sure what their agenda is, but I felt like there was just nobody here that I could identify with and that I was with emotionally. And because like Matt mentioned, I mean, so often characters have plans and then there's like a throwaway line to explain their motivations that was like 100 pages earlier or like 100 pages later, or it doesn't appear at all. And, I finished reading this yesterday morning and I spent like all the intervening time going through trying to like find any lines that had to do with character motivation to try to sort out what everyone's motivations were. And it's like really slim pickings. And it was a really exhausting process trying to just find.
It's interesting. I didn't have that experience.
Yeah,
it could just be, we're different readers. Yeah.
But like, what did you know what Jessica's like aim was? Because like people say, oh, she's working for the Bene Gesserit, and then it's again like unclear. And even at the end, I'm not really sure.
Her aim was to save House Atreides because she was still loyal to her dead Duke. But
she almost killed the kids. Like she would have killed the kids if she needed to.
If they were abominations.
Right. So again, like I don't know who she was working for still. Like I don't know why she's doing any of the things that she's doing.
Because go ahead, Andrea.
Well, I was just, for me, what she was coming back to do was to fix the mistake she made in the first place. Mm-hmm. The mistake she made with Alia, the mistake she made with Paul. I think that to me, she may have talked to the Bene Gesserits, but she's there on her own mission.
Yeah.
But then why did she wait so long? I mean, because honestly, she shows up too late.
And I think she also, yes.
For Alia.
Yes, and I have a great deal to say about that. And I don't know if Dave wants me to go into that now or later, but
can I just say something in response to your summary of the beginning, David?
Yeah.
Just to, because I said I tapped out of this. The thing that made me put this down the first time and the thing that got under my skin again the second time is this whole genetic memory thing that Leto and Ganima apparently have, where they have the memories and life experiences of anybody who they can trace their DNA from. So I find that idea to be completely ridiculous because, for example, they're going back to ancient Rome or whatever, and
ancient Greece.
And so like they're saying that basically, a single egg or sperm, which carries half of your genetic material, also contains the life experiences of that person up until the point that it comes out of them, which I find ridiculous. And I
don't think it was supposed to come from the DNA, but go ahead.
But in the first book, for example, Alia gets the memories. She's born with the memories of all of the Reverend Mothers because that's how they pass their stuff down. So the Reverend Mother before her would have passed it to her, and she had all the people that came before her, and that was a spice-oriented kind of mental thing. And now all of a sudden it's like, because he calls it genetic memory, and he basically says that up until his conception, that's where he has all of Paul's memories, and up until I guess all of his mother's stuff. Yes. And not only did that bug me just because I think it's dumb, but it's like you cannot. I know that these people, Paul could see the future and all that kind of stuff, but I was willing to buy that. But like you cannot contain that many like life experiences in a human brain. I get it that the spice sort of does something, but like I really had a problem with that completely. And they're like real people just out in the back going like, hey, can I step in here and say something?
So
that was one of my biggest problems. Sure, of course.
Can I respond to that? So the way I see it is that it's not DNA. I don't think that Herbert was saying that it was direct from the DNA. I think it was like from the moment of conception, that's the point at which the memories begin or end. But the spice lets you view the future, but also the same, it sort of lets you view the past. And I think that that's what's happening to their mind is opening up to their past ancestry. They're like Herbert says very often that time is not this linear thing. It's happening all at once. So to me, it's like they're seeing their past. And, Jessica comes back to Arrakis because yes, she's failed with Alia, but also she doesn't want to fail with her grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big setups at the beginning of the book is that Alia, it's pretty sure that she's an abomination. What is an abomination?
I mean, he only says it 50 times. So
basically, right? Basically, they have DID, dissociative identity disorder. They don't have a solid sense of self. And then what happens is one of their ruthless, brutal past selves becomes the dominant personality. Now, the thing is, the Bene Gesserit are actually trained to resist this, but that's why they only do this ritual when they're
Adults.
Fully trained Bene Gesserit women who are ready to do that. But the problem with Alia was that when Jessica ingested the water of life while she was pregnant, Alia became fully conscious as a fetus, and that's what messed her up completely. Yeah. That's why she ran away back to Caladan. She couldn't deal with that.
Yes.
And also her Duke died, yes. And she just all of that stuff is just sitting with her. So that's why she's coming back to Arrakis. She's like, I have to fix this thing that I broke, and she wants to make sure that her grandchildren don't suffer the same fate.
Well,
can I just close the loop on this, and then I'll shut up about it. But I like your interpretation better, Matt. But it seems to me as like somebody who changed the rules of what he was doing, because we never had any inkling that Alia could had the memories and life experiences of her ancestors. We only knew that she had them of all the Reverend Mothers who had come before and was born fully aware of those experiences. So I feel like he changed. By this time, probably found it more interesting to go into that kind of idea of for the kids and everything. But I'll just say I don't like it. So, but yeah. I understand.
No, I'm basically with Raj on all that stuff. But let me just say about the motivations, because like I said, I spent the whole yesterday and this morning I was trying to avoid spoilers for God Emperor of Dune, so that limited me somewhat. But just even reading all these comments from hardcore Dune fans who've read these books dozens of times and spend their time hanging out on Dune message boards, there is no agreement among any of them about what any of the agendas of any of these characters are.
Okay.
And they even said like Raj's point about is Jessica, to what degree is Jessica doing the bidding of the Bene Gesserit? They're like, fans have been arguing about this for decades with no agreement whatsoever about it. So this is not just my weird thing. This is definitely...
I think Herbert wants you to also wonder, because there's that scene where Leto is talking to Jessica and he's like, and now you realize how much the Bene Gesserit have conditioned you. So it's like, was she there on their behest without even realizing it? It's
there is this where she does at one point think about having seen her sisterhood and being sent there. And she also wonders if they tricked her. Yeah. And I think the thing with motivation is that everybody has motivations within motivations within motivations. I think they say frequently a feint within a feint within a feint. Yeah. Everybody's got their own agenda. Everybody's got somebody else's agenda. And that's the war within every single character, the character conflict within every single character. Do I work for my own aims, or do I carry out my orders, or, do I think of the future? Do I think of myself? I think that's the general conflict within everyone and within the story. is.
Yeah,
Yeah, no.
absolutely.
No, but it's fine for characters to have complicated motivations on different levels and everything, but I just think it should be conveyed to the reader in a clearer way. I mean, there's a thing they say in public speaking is like, you got to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, you know, that like, you need to tell people something.
Speaking and selling. That's selling. It's not telling a story.
Wait. Let me just finish. I just think that you can't, if it's important what this character's motivation is, it wouldn't hurt to mention a couple times in the course of a 600-page book, not once 100 pages separated from the point where they actually act. That's all.
That's fair. That's fair. But I also feel that in some ways, what we expect from fiction has changed, because one of the things that Herbert does throughout is he jumps points of view all the time, like sometimes paragraph to paragraph, or even in the same paragraph.
Yes.
And like almost no fiction I read now does that. So that's one thing. And then, there's like, I think a lot of fiction, especially like a lot of like fiction classes, teach you, oh, you need to establish your character's desires right away, and you need to establish setting right away, and you need to do X, A, B, and C. And like, I don't think Herbert is from that school. And I think, that may be what you're getting from it, that you have this expectation from like books written in the last, 30 years or so. And maybe this is just written in a different style. It's almost like a different culture. Like if we were to read a book, that was originally written in Chinese, there might be cultural differences that we're not getting. I wonder if some of that is just that, Herbert is not writing with the same
reference point.
That we're used to now.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
We're not,
go ahead.
No, you finish.
Well, it was just that it's as I'm reading, I'm thinking this is a very old-fashioned written book, and I think a lot of the stuff we read from the past, like say Asimov or the classics, I find that off-putting. This wasn't, because it engaged me intellectually, because the number of references, historical references and philosophical references in this, it just blew my mind. And, when I read it at 14, I would never have understood half of them.
Same.
And reading that now, it's like I'm sitting there marveling at the amount of knowledge that he had to even use these references. I mean, he talks about Agamemnon, we talk about, ancient Greek, and they talk about how they speak ancient Greek. That's one of the languages they use in private between the two twins. Agamemnon, there's references to Ovid, to Bartlett's, a lot of, as they say, their tyrannic past or their tyrannic origins. And it's just unbelievably thick, rife with reference to history and literature. That
I also think,
No, go ahead. No.
I'm sorry. I also think that, he's going for a kind of biblical / religious tone.
Oh God, yes.
And I think that if you read the biblical texts, it's not they're going to say, Abraham, what he really wanted was a nice family and a farm and maybe a couple of oxen. It's like no, Abraham lived in the land of Ur, and you know what I mean. It's like it's just very matter of fact, and it's up to you to sort of interpret it. But there was like so many references to like, I was trying to figure out all the, religious references. I have Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, obviously Christian, Jewish references. There's also a lot of
ancient Egyptian,
Jungian psychology. I mean, there's so much in there.
Can I just say, I feel like we were just accused of being unsophisticated readers or something. But,
yes, totally.
I mean,
that's my first thought when I think of you, Raj.
To be honest, listening to the both of you speak, I mean, I think it might just be more of a, like, I enjoy the philosophy part, but it's not enough for me. Like I'm reading to find some other connection. I think it's cool, but a lot of that stuff without more grounding for me as a reader isn't like, I was like, okay, but like connect this to something for me. I think toward the end, especially, I think the philosophy got more interesting about like, what stuff about civilization and what people need and what people don't, what societies need, what societies don't. I think that was more interesting, but these days when I read, I need to have some kind of emotional or character connection to feel that level of attachment to something. And I didn't really get that, especially because it starts off with these two kids who deliberately are supposed to be these alien presences who no one else can relate to, and they can only relate to themselves and sort of speak in their own language. And I was like, okay, all right, whatever.
And again, like I said, idea is totally first rate. I saw a meme or something where it said the first two books of Dune are the politics books, and the second two books are the philosophy books, and then the third two books are the weird sex books. Having read them, I can't comment on that. But I love philosophy, I love ideas, I love the history and everything. I'm just like, my reaction to this book was it seemed like an intellectual exercise, and it didn't seem like he was that interested in the characters. Like, he had all these ideas he wanted to explore, and he sort of like was going through the motions with the characters, is how it read to me, because the ideas were what he was really interested in.
Yeah,
don't you feel that Alia is given short shrift in this book? I mean, she's painted as a villain from the beginning. We see a few times that she's fighting the Baron, but I feel like there was way more that they could have done with her struggle before she gave in. It was just like from the beginning, she was, doing terrible things and plotting. And I never felt her a sympathetic character the way that he portrayed her. I wanted to. I felt like it was there in the background based on what we were led to believe her life was growing up. But I felt like he didn't give a crap about that when he was writing it.
I mean, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just I disagree with that, but do you? I just think Alia is the most heartbreaking character here, and I felt very attached to her. I don't know if it's because I'm bringing it over from the first two books, but Alia is set up as the villain of the story, but she's the villain of the story, but she's not a villain. Right. She's the true tragedy. Leto's a tragedy. Leto's end is a tragedy, or Leto's fate is a tragedy. But she's the true tragedy of the book. In the classic sense, going back to Greek drama in Oedipus and the Oresteia and Shakespeare's Macbeth. The noble character who falls from grace and loses their soul on account of their own faults, like pride, rage, greed. But Alia falls because of her weaknesses, but those are weaknesses that she's born with. Those are weaknesses of others. And specifically, and here's what I was, I wanted to go in, Raji mentioned, why did Jessica wait so long to come back? That's the problem right there.
Yeah.
Jessica's the villain of the story, really. Jessica is a villain. She's
hiding out in luxury.
Exactly. She's incredibly selfish. And when you look back at the earlier books, or at least Dune, because she's not in Dune Messiah, she's incredibly selfish. She's selfish when she gives birth to a son when she's supposed to give birth to a daughter, leading to all this, what happened. She's selfish when she takes the water of life when she's pregnant. She knows what it'll do and she does it anyway. She sacrifices her daughter to save her son. And then she ran out on her 2-year-old daughter, then left her there to deal alone with the consequences of her actions, instead of staying on Dune and being the guide that she needed. Alia's downfall is specifically because of Jessica. And I came out of this horrified by what a terrible person Jessica is. And then she comes back as judge and jury on her daughter in a situation that she created, in a tragic situation that she created. And Alia, the scene where she struggles with the Baron just fucking broke my heart. And then the goodbye scene with Duncan, again, breaks my heart. And then her ending, which is, she actually comes back and fights the Baron, and she falls on her sword. She sacrifices her life to kill the villain in this, which is at the moment, Baron Harkonnen. So she ends up being a tragedy and the hero, in that she takes herself out of the game because she knows she can't stand up to him.
I agree with that 100%. And I just want to add two small things to that. one of the themes in all the Dune books is that there are forces greater than any individual. And I think Alia got hit with these forces right in the face. And that's why it's a tragedy. And there's also that moment right before she throws herself out the window where she looks at her mother and you see the hint of the old Alia in there. Mm-hmm. You see the hint of the old girl, this helpless girl. And that was, to me, was heartbreaking because you knew that inside this horrific, external form was just a frightened little girl. And that to me broke my heart. And I wanted to see them try to reform Alia, but I know like that's not what Frank Herbert does. But it was. I found that heartbreaking too.
I just don't think it's on the page. That's my criticism. But I agree with you on Jessica. I mean, I think she fucked everything up really. So,
yeah. I agree with Rush. I mean, like as I was, like I said, I thought the middle section of this book, I just felt like nothing was really happening for a long time. I liked the beginning and I liked the ending. So all that stuff you're talking about with Alia's arc worked well enough for me. But like Raj is saying, like, and so I was like, I could imagine this. I'm actually really curious now to watch the Sci-Fi Channel adaptation of this because I could see this being like the bones of the story, I think, are totally solid. Mm-hmm. It's just like Raj is saying, for me, it's the execution where I feel like I'm not really like, psychologically very close to any of the characters. And there's a lot of like pages that are going by where I feel like nothing's happening. But I feel like if you sort of cut out all the dead weight and, had some engaging actors to bring life to these characters and make you connect emotionally with them, I feel like the overall structure of the story is pretty solid. And, so now, like I said, I'm curious to see the adaptation.
I look forward to doing that podcast with you because I did see the show when it came out and I remember enjoying it quite a bit. So
I remember thinking it was certainly better than the Dune one,
than the previous one. Yeah,
and they put together it's both Messiah and Children of Dune. Mm-hmm. It's both of them together. It's not they didn't separate them.
But isn't it? They're older, right? Like Leto is older.
Yes,
right?
they have them as teenagers. Yeah, which I think is actually a good choice because it's. Especially because you don't want to think about sex in 9-year-old children.
True, but in the beginning, I will say that I all I kept thinking back to was the Lynch version, and when Alia comes out and she goes, "Hello, Baron," when that voice and like how creepy that is, and I just kept thinking of those kids being like, these are the creepiest freaking kids that ever existed because they walk around talking in other languages like they're adults and talk about having had relationships and lives and what, like they must freak everyone out.
Yeah. Well, they did talk about in Dune how everybody was terrified of Alia. Nobody wanted to go near her. And the only person she had to talk to was her mother.
Yeah.
So what do you guys who really liked this book, what do you think about what I'm saying about the middle section kind of dragged for me? And I felt like there were all these characters like Namri, like Tariq, Javid, Maurice, who like never really made much of an impression on me. And I would have to like, whenever their names were mentioned later on, I have to be like, wait, who is that again? Did all those characters kind of like come alive and work for you? Or do you hear what I'm saying? That the middle kind of felt sort of.
I mean, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I was still trying to formulate my thoughts on that.
Okay. It's an epic book. And I think in an epic book, you're going to have secondary and tertiary characters. Mm-hmm. And I think that they serve their role as that. I don't think they were necessarily there to bring the plot forward in any, like, okay. They helped the plot along, but I don't think you were meant to get an enormous amount of like story or backstory from them. They were just sort of, pieces in the larger narrative. So I didn't mind that as much. I my only criticism of this book is there's a couple places where I felt like Herbert was maybe intentionally convoluting the plot in order to make things more mysterious than they were. An example was like when Alia and Lady Jessica were we're in the court, it's very obvious that, Alia wanted to kill her, but Herbert made it seem like it's this complex, multi-layered thing. And there was just, it seemed like he was like over complexifying something. And I think that if there's a weakness here, it's his tendency to over complexify some plot elements. And then the other thing I will say is that I think sometimes he doesn't allow his characters to feel as much as they could. And I think maybe this is what you're sensing, Raj, that you're not fully connecting with them. Because, like, for example, Jessica just watched both of her children die, right? So both Alia jumps out a window and Paul's murdered in the street. And there's not really any time for her given, like even Alia says it to her before she dies. She's like, your son just died. And like Jessica doesn't really react to that, and then it's kind of, we just like skip ahead.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that, because I mean, one of my favorite character in this whole book is Duncan Idaho, because he's the only one that felt human to me. He feels things. He's upset when he like his like sadness at recognizing what has happened to Alia is so palpable to me that I was all in on that. And then when what he does to Stilgar at the end, like that is my favorite moment in the whole book, I think, because, there's a reference earlier where Jessica tells him exactly what he needed to strip away Stilgar's like civility or whatever. And he just does it for a specific reason. And then only then does Alia have her emotional apotheosis when she learns what happened to him. And I think that's the turning tide for her. Again, I don't have a problem with her arc. I just didn't feel her story the way I wanted to. But Duncan and even Namri, who I hated, like he was a dick. He was just like waiting to kill Leto. And even though I didn't really love Leto that much, I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? But I felt like he had understandable motivations to me. I understood like what he wanted. I understood who he hated, and I understood that I didn't like him. And so like he wasn't my favorite character, but I felt something around him. And Duncan, he felt real to me. And his like, he's in 2 chapters, I think, in this whole thing. And yet every time he was, and that's probably why I said the middle started to move for me, is like, because he shows up in the middle and he's not even like, he's playing other people's games, but he's really playing his own game. And I appreciate that.
Wait. So Raj, when you say that he sacrifices himself for a specific reason, what is that reason?
Well, I don't know that I could articulate the exact reason that I think Herbert was going for, but at least there's more to that arc that I feel like I can guess at some of the reasons. I definitely think that he was just heartbroken. I mean, basically he came back and Alia was, I think, his anchor. And then when he knew that she was lost, that was one of the reasons he decided his life wasn't necessary. But also I think he's like, the way I see it just now, it popped into my head, Mercutio. When Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet says a plague on both your houses, he's just sick of what's going on. He served the Atreides. He says again, he died twice for them now, and both of them were worthless. And so I think he's just basically given up on this arcane, political maneuvering thing that sets these people against each other. It's almost like they start off playing these schemes and games when they could have just all sat down and talked it out and figured out how to like fix things. So that is my understanding of sort of where he's coming from,
Well, here's what I agree with you. That is one of the most powerful scenes in the book. And here's the thing. I think they actually do mention at some point that people don't act. People like slink around like snakes trying to position themselves, and they don't act. Duncan's a man of action. He's a swordsman. He's a thinker. And that's him acting and forcing. He did that to force Stilgar's hand, to force him to take Ghanima and leave.
That's true.
He wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, you're right.
He literally spends that whole beginning of that chapter saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm waiting. So he does it specifically. He sacrifices himself to save Ghanima.
You're right.
And Stilgar, because Stilgar is still his friend. He has now sacrificed himself twice for House Atreides.
Which is why he smiles when he dies.
Yes, exactly. exactly.
By the way, I think Stilgar remains the same for me through all the books. Whereas, like, I don't dislike him, but I don't like him. He's sort of just there, like, doing his own thing, and I'm like, what? He almost kills. He thinks about killing Leto in the beginning, and then he's like, I never know where he is, but I feel like that's part of his character. He's just so Fremen that he follows his own code, kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. He is the ultimate Fremen. He and he does a lot of lamenting about the losing the real life of the Fremen, and I think he's like the conscience of the Fremen, but he doesn't know how to act within this new world. And he's pretty much spends the whole book being really depressed and not being able to make a move because either way, he will violate some code.
Can I just ask you guys a question though? Like, because one of the hinging moments of this whole book is on the fact that the realization that if they keep on, with this terraforming or ecological change on Arrakis, that the sandworms will die out, right? Because they're bringing water, and water is inimical to the sandworms, and they're already kind of rare at this point. And I just had this moment of like, how is this kid the first one who thought about this? Because they already know the relationship of the water and the spice and the worms. Paul knew that, it's well known. So Liet Kynes, I assume, knew that. So why is it that everyone's like, no, that can't happen? Like, I get if they're like, Fremen who live out in the desert and they're not up to date on these things, but there's all these mentat smart people all over the place, and nobody has figured that out. And I found that to be such a dud of a revelation, that it was like, didn't move me, it wasn't like oh my God, it was sort of like, yeah, why didn't you think of that?
I mean, if you go back to the first book, right, Dr. Liet Kynes fed them this idea of paradise, that, the Fremen are living these difficult lives in these sieges in the desert, and, they water is extremely rationed. They have to wear still suits just to go outside to contain their water. And, along comes Liet Kynes, and he's like, I'm going to make it rain on Arrakis. And he's like, when he first came there, he said, oh, this is the project of, I forgot what he said, hundreds of, exactly, like generations. So it was like, it was kind of like, in a sense, like a religious eschatology, maybe with, without the apocalypse, but it's like this promise of paradise in the future. And then along comes Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib, and he's like, I'm going to bring it now. And there's, I think that's part of the theme of Dune, is this idea that the paradise, quote unquote, that a Messiah brings may not actually be good, right? Because this jihad sweeps across the universe. I forget how many billions are killed. And the spice, which is the very essence of space travel, without which they can go from planet to planet, is dwindling because of this. So I think it was just the idea that humanity wasn't really aware of what this future would bring, and I think Leto sees this, and sees that the only way that humanity will survive is by doing this crazy transformation, and basically forcing humanity into a kind of moribund stasis for 4,000 years, after which there will be some terrible calamity, which is only hinted at, and then will change humanity forever. And then at that point, only then will humans be free.
So have you guys read God Emperor of Dune?
I have not.
Long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Okay, so you have a vague idea of where the story goes beyond what's in this book?
Very vague.
Same. Yeah.
Very vague.
Extremely vague, to the point where I can't remember a lot.
Yeah, I can't remember a lot at all.
But do you remember it being good? How did you?
It's hard for me to say, because, as I said, I hated these two books when I was 14, and if I read that at 14, I probably thought it sucked. but I can't tell you right now. I'd have to read it again to tell you whether I think it's good or not.
Because I saw a lot of people online were saying basically like to understand this book, it helps a lot to read God Emperor of Dune. And one of the things I've noticed with the 3 books that I've read is that Herbert has this pattern of having things be extremely opaque and vague in one book and then explaining them very clearly in passing in the next book. So I could imagine maybe if you've read God Emperor of Dune, it explains some of the stuff going on in this book.
So you know what that means, Dave? That means we have to do a podcast on the next book.
No, I think I don't know. I've heard so many people talking up God Emperor of Dune. I feel like we do need to read it. It seems like the consensus basically is that if you're going to read the sequels, that you should at least get to that one.
That's what I heard as well. Yeah. But I think that to your point, Dave, I we learned in this book what Paul was reluctant to do or refused to do in the previous 2 books, which was just kind of this vague thing that we didn't know what it was. And now we know what it was because Leto goes ahead and does it. So I won't spoil it yet until we're ready to talk about it. But
I think we've kind of spoiled it already. But so I sent you guys, there's a scene in the book where Leto and Paul are reunited. And we know by this point that the preacher is definitely Paul. And he and Paul and Leto have this conversation about like their competing visions of the future and who's going to prevail and why Paul made the choices that he made and why Leto's making the choices that he made. And I just wonder, was that all clear to everyone or like, because it's a pretty...
my understanding is the following, and please correct or add to this if it's not complete. So basically, like what you said, Dave, that Paul saw the future, the quote unquote golden path, and saw only the 4,000 years of stagnation. Whereas Leto looked further and saw that without this 4,000 years of stagnation, humanity would go extinct. So Leto realizes that the only way to keep humanity from going extinct is to force them into this calamitous moment, which is going to be worse than anything that Muad'Dib did, or Muad'Dib's religion, worse than the billions killed in Muad'Dib's jihad. But on the other side of that, humanity continues to exist. Without that, you have eventual senescence and extinction.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I read it.
That sounds exactly right to me.
I think the crux of this conversation is when Paul says, or thousands, where Leto says 1,000 years of peace, that's what I'll give them. And Paul yells dormancy, stagnation, which made me think how I think the point of this is he's trying to point out that peace is stagnation. War and strife leads to innovation and evolution. And when you look at history, that bears it up in, World War II was horrific, but it brought us advances, very quick advances in science and engineering and medicine. And if anybody remembers Fifth Element, there's a scene where Zorg is talking to the priest, and he talks about how chaos and destruction encourages life. And it's the same concept that living in peace, we become soft. Like he talks about the wet-faced Fremens, the new Fremens. We become soft. But in chaos, destruction, and strife is when we become more innovative and we evolve. And I think that's the crux of that whole conversation.
So there seems to be 3 motivations that I can think of, or that I saw people mention online, for why Paul doesn't do the golden path. And one is that he doesn't want to turn into a worm. 2 is that it involves a degree of destruction that he just can't bring himself to stomach. Mm-hmm. And 3 is that he can't see as far as Leto does to see all the consequences.
I think all of those actually work.
Yeah.
There just seems to be like a little bit of a weird contradiction to me. where Leto, and maybe this becomes clearer throughout their conversation, but Leto at one point says like Paul just basically didn't have the fortitude or resolve or something to do what needed to be done. But then that seems to conflict to me with the idea that if Paul only saw a bad future along this golden path, then it's not a lack of resolve or fortitude that caused him not to take it. It's just
it's here.
The consequences seem bad to him.
Paul goes, is the typhoon struggle necessary? And Leto says, it's that or humans will be extinguished. And then Paul heard the truth in Leto's words, spoke in a low voice, which acknowledged the greater breadth of his son's vision. And then he says, I did not see that among the choices. Yeah. So like he literally says, I didn't see what you saw, the third option or the whatever option it was, like Matt said, where, he saw something that Paul didn't. So, I mean, I don't know why that would be, but
I think the implication was that he didn't look far enough, that he kind of shied away from the visions after a while because he was so shattered by them. So another thing he says in that passage, to your point, Dave, is that Paul, even though some of his acts resulted in great evil, he never believed they would result in that before he took them. He would never do an evil act willingly, whereas Leto's like, no, I need to do this evil act because only on the other side of this will humanity survive. And I think like it was almost Paul saying, I can't go against my morality, and whereas Leto's like,
so is Paul saying that if he could have seen what Leto saw, he still wouldn't have done it just because he lacks the stomach to cause that much suffering?
I think that's what he's saying, because I think he's also shattered by the amount of death that he's already caused, and Leto's saying that this is going to cause much worse.
And I wonder if that's partly because he was raised the way he, on Caladan by the Duke in the Atreides sort of noble hero fashion, whereas these kids were raised on Arrakis with Fremen and Alia.
And there is there's a whole talk there about how Leto is actually Fremen, and he says to Paul, "You weren't raised Fremen.
By the way,
we are real Fremen."
Yeah, exactly. I just want to shout out to Irulan, who surprised me at being kind of like a decent person in this book, and sort of like grew to love the kids, which I kind of found a really cool concept, because it goes against sort of what we were led to believe previously, that it was just this formality. But man, poor House Carino, they keep getting shafted all the time when it comes to like.
Could I ask you, because there's this scene where Irulan, because the Carino Wenzisha, Irulan's mother,
sister,
right?
Sister,
is it
right? Sister or
sister,
aunt,
or no? Because I think it's her sister. She's
sister.
The daughter of Shaddam IV, and so that's why Farad'n is his grandson. So
yeah, so Wenzisha is plotting to assassinate Leto and Ganima with this, like by training these alien tigers to attack anyone wearing these particular clothes, and they give the clothes as gifts to Leto and Ganima. And Irulan is sort of like advocating, oh yeah, we should accept this gift. And so I thought it was ambiguous whether she knows about the plot or not, whether she just does she just want to accept the gift because it's like a gift from her family and she wants to be polite, or does she know about the plot and she's like trying to effectuate the plot? And there was no resolution to that question. I
didn't think that I think she wanted to protect the kids. I don't think she would have willingly put them in danger.
I think she might have been in favor of the marriage, between Ganima and Farad'n, which would have united their houses. But I believe that she loved, when she tells Ganima that she loved them like they were her own children, I believed it. Like I felt that worked for me too. It's funny because again, everyone else kind of like says how she doesn't really know, she's off to the side. Everyone looks down. Jessica looks down on her. Alia looks down on her in terms of like, she's not plotting and scheming, but like she is the only one there that actually like professes actual love for those kids. Like there's nobody else who does, which I kind of find amazing.
Well, it's funny too, Raj, when you were saying that Duncan was your favorite character. Weirdly, in this, my favorite character was Farad'n. Because I felt like
cool.
He's great.
I loved him. He was unexpected. He didn't go like every time I thought I knew where he was going, he did something different. Like I thought he was cool.
Yeah, but I could morals. Sort of relate to him emotionally. I kind of knew what he wanted and knew what he was about, and you were kind of like with him along for each step of the journey.
Especially when he sent his mom packing, I was
I really like where Jessica's training him in Bene Gesserit ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought he was going to flunk out because he's just sitting there like, I can't do it. I'm like, it's been like 2 minutes, dude. Like, give it some time. And then all of a sudden he's okay. But I see, I liked him. I assumed that at the end he was still going to marry Ghanima and become emperor because Leto was turning into a worm. But I guess he's not. So that part didn't make so much sense to me, because how can you be emperor and be off like strolling through the desert with like worm flesh? I don't know.
You got assistants to take care of all that stuff.
That is my second biggest thing that I hated about this book is super powered worm flesh Leto just drove me crazy, because he just starts throwing doors and like punching worms and like jumping, like he can jump. I'm like, how does that happen just from wearing the sand trout on your body? Like, how is this organism, which is supposed to be like very primitive, giving you super strength, allowing you to jump? And I get if you want to slide through the desert, they're designed to do that. But like, how is he super strong from that kind of stuff? I don't get it.
I mean, I think Herbert has always hinted that there was something mystical / supernatural about the worms. And I think that when his flesh merges with the sand trout, he gains these, near supernatural powers.
I mean, I will say I love, so I people had told me like, oh, he turns into a worm. I'm like, I didn't get that far. But like when I read how it happens, I mean, there's a lot of setup for the sand trout stuff that happens again right before that, where it's like if you bite into them, they give you energy. And so like when he starts making a still suit out of it, you're like, oh, perfect, because like they absorb water and they produce energy. So it's essentially an organic still suit, which is rather convenient. But I was cool with the weirdness of it because it wasn't anything that I would have imagined. And I understood that he can sort of command worms because they're conditioned not to go near water and not to harm their younger life form phase. All that stuff made sense to me. But I think for me, and I'll just say for me, and I love superhero comics and movies and all that kind of stuff, but it felt like suddenly like a comic book hero jumped into this Dune novel that I was reading, and it was jarring to me how those action sequences went and were not very well written in terms of like, they're very quick and all of a sudden he's just doing these things. And I was like, wait, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
And
I agree with that. It was like the Venom suit in Spider-Man. Yeah. Is what it made me think of. Like,
and all the other combat and stuff is so subtle and like, slow blade penetrates the shield and like everyone's using the Chris knives and they're using these kind of like delicate little things. And here's Leto with worms all over his skin, just like punching doors down and ripping things apart and, and just like at super speed, like and in my mind, I think I probably had this Super Mario like image of him just like going around jumping and like punching things and whatever. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
But I just think we haven't talked about how the whole time he's doing this, he keeps talking about how he's changing his own chemistry, which is something he can do on his own.
Sure,
he's able to change his chemistry because of his mastery of his own body. And his DNA. And I think what happens is he changes his chemistry, and that new chemistry combined with whatever's coming off him from the sand trout is what changes him into something else. And this thing, the chemistry changes in his body give him these powers.
And yet he's also a 10-year-old boy still.
Yeah.
I just thought it should have been a little more gradual and a little more toned down.
Like, yeah, me too.
That's fair.
That's the only thing I would say. I don't want it removed, but it just felt too much all of a sudden. And I feel like maybe Herbert was enjoying it, or like maybe it was just like, oh, cool. Like now he has worm suit on. But I mean, the coolest part was when he's like, it's now the cilia are like, joining with his flesh. And I was like, okay, cool. Now I like this idea. But I also like Faradin being like, when is he going to take that suit off? And kind of be like, well, actually, what do you think, Matt? Do you like it?
I did have that a little bit of a surprise when he's kind of like leaping around and with superpowers, but I I did really like it because, like you said, a lot of stuff sort of happens at this really slow pace, and then all of a sudden you have Leto just like smashing the qanats, the water storehouses, and like undoing the work of like a decade of planetary engineering in just like a month, and I really enjoyed that. And then I think they established that the worms have a lifespan of sometimes thousands of years, if I'm not mistaken. So the fact that he's merging with them and adjusting his body chemistry to match theirs, I really like that idea that he's becoming this near invulnerable being that's going to last thousands of years, because he's essentially installing himself as this emperor that cannot be touched so that he can save humanity. So I think that's pretty cool. And I love the idea that it's a worm. It's not like it's not like
sexy.
It's not this like beautiful creature like like I don't know, an eagle or a horse or something. It's a worm, which most people find fairly repulsive, and that's what he's merging with, and that's what's going to save humanity, but not before a terrible calamity. That part of it I found really worked for me in a body horror way.
Yeah. I think you're right, though. I think it's possibly because it was so slow, and then all of a sudden there's all this stuff happening very quickly, that I think that was part of the jarring nature for me. And it's only around Leto. But I also will say that now that I'm thinking about this, that, they do set up that he has been force-fed probably more spice than anyone has ever had before. Which again seems like a very stupid tactic, but whatever. But they force feed him all this spice. So I would imagine that he has also other abilities that no one else has had before because of that, possibly too. So,
I mean, also think of the fact that if you were able to command memories of countless people, all of your previous ancestors going back to,
don't bring that up
right?
again, please.
I mean, just think of all the knowledge that you would have and the abilities.
By the way, isn't the end of this sort of like, one of those mystery novels where like they arrange for everyone to be in the same place so that like the end
so
can be revealed? Because like they all end up, they all end up sort of in there, except for I guess Paul never quite makes it all the way. But I think it because I love Paul Atreides as a character. I kind of loved the blind kind of seer. Like to me, that archetype just really works for me. I was sad when he died. I mean, I know he probably had no other purpose and whatever, but like I thought he was cool. I don't know.
And it was also like he died, but we're in the point of view of like up from the watchtower or the watch room. So it's like we weren't actually like down there when he died, and to see it and like kind of see it from his eyes, or at least nearby.
But I mean, Jessica never gets to see him, and yet like she's the only one who doesn't, get the Paul realization. But I guess she doesn't deserve it, right? Because she's kind of it's her fault.
That is her punishment, is to not to connect one last time with her son, and also to watch both her children die.
Yeah,
because of her acts.
And I also think that Herbert intentionally had Paul die, maybe not off camera so much, but from a distance, just to show that like, a great leader, quote unquote, great, like just can die just like anybody else and just like a scrum, and he's just dead and that's it. And it's not like, I think over and over again, we see Herbert reinforce this idea that, maybe you shouldn't always trust the hero or the demagogue,
Yeah. Well, that's the point. That's his point, I think.
Yeah. And just, I think that's why we see Paul die in this kind of, I don't want to say pathetic, but like this,
it's sort of ignoble way.
But it's like, it's not that far from like Gandhi, right? I mean, Gandhi was just like in this crowd doing a thing. Somebody pulled out and shot him. I mean, like it's. So that's a good, point.
All right. So we need to start wrapping this up pretty soon. Did anyone have any like other big topics that they were just dying to talk about? I
I said my two big things, but I in terms of just the writing, like he has an awful lot of repetition of certain things in this book. Like I feel like he decided that there were such things as spice fibers, and then everything, is spice fiber rug, spice fiber curtain, spice fiber whatever.
Yeah, I have that
sort of
written
like
down.
I'm like, why? And then he repeats the abomination quite a lot. There's certain like certain words, and like Jakurutu is like, just like there's a lot of times where I'm like, oh God, that word again or whatever. And I guess it's funny which things he reinforces over and over again and which things he doesn't, because you don't really understand the importance of Jakurutu until, like, again, much later in the book. And it's meaningless before then. They don't even tell you that it was like where they used to, like you don't learn that it's where the Fremen who used to steal other people's water was until later. And to be honest, I don't know, maybe you guys picked it up earlier, but like when Leto's like, oh, they found Paul in the desert and took him there, and that helped kind of, shape where Paul ended up. And I didn't even get that until he mentions it. Was that supposed to be clear before that?
No.
Yeah,
No.
No.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
well, this is the thing, is that, like, again, I love Herbert's world building and ideas, but I don't really like his storytelling style. And this reminds me so much of Game of Thrones. Like, George R. R. Martin obviously took a lot from Dune, but I just like his storytelling style so much more. I just like the minor characters come to life more. The major characters, I feel like I can emotionally identify more. It has the same sort of epic feel and politics and world building and everything. And I just feel like it's, in my opinion, just like objectively an advance in storytelling craft.
Yeah, I mean, I think Martin writes from a very close third person point of view, so you really get into into the characters' heads.
Yeah, but I think there's also, like, you were talking before about how you have these minor characters. Like the one that you mentioned, Dave, that jumped out to me was Javid, because he set up that he was going to be this agent. Alia ends up forcing or like making a sexual relationship out of it so she can better control him. And really, he's just sort of there in the background, and then he's there for Duncan to kill him, and he doesn't really do anything. And yet other writers might actually give him some kind of, because every character has a life. Every character is the hero of their own story. And we get no inkling of anything about this dude. Like Namri, at least we get something from. Maurice, I think, or Muniz, what we get something about. But like this guy is just like this, again, sort of mustache twirling, cut out in the background. And I feel like, again, I think you're right. I don't think Herbert cares about that. It's just sort of a piece to move the other pieces around. But I do think whether you're telling a close third or whatever, or distant third, there's no thought given to, like, or maybe give him some kind of quality that we can cling to. Like, oh, he really likes to drink his coffee cold or something. I don't know what it is, but I feel like a lot of writers would do that just to give it a little bit more life. And I think that there are places where Herbert just doesn't even bother.
Well, I actually have a note. It says, when we learn that Gurney Halleck plays the Balisette, that one detail makes him the best developed character in all of Dune. Because,
well, also he has an ink vine scar. Don't forget,
because like so much else, it's just like all we know about the characters is what's relevant to the plot, and there's no like color beyond that. And so, I just think that's something that Herbert could improve on for sure.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, and I said this earlier, that this is a very old-fashioned style of writing, which fits because he's from, or at least just after that golden age of science fiction, Herbert, I mean. And I don't know, Dave, if you remember, we did a panel on a show that was made from a George R. R. Martin novella.
Night Flyers?
Night Flyers,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so we watched the show, and then we also read the story. And I remember very vividly at the time saying that this is a very old-fashioned writing. It's very unaccessible. It's very dead on the page. And I remember specifically saying, this is very old-fashioned. And I think you watch as George R. R. Martin gets older, he evolves as a writer. So I think he's influenced by the writers like Herbert and Asimov and those guys, and he evolves. So I think this touches also on the evolution of writing and science fiction writing that Matt talked about, that we are very different writers now fiction and prose is very different than it was.
But are you guys saying like the way this is written is like it worked for me, but it could be improved on? Or you're saying like, no, they're just different ways and one's not better than the other?
It worked for me and it doesn't work for me in other things. This worked for me. And I think maybe it's just because it challenged me a little more because it's more about philosophy than about science. Does that make sense?
This definitely worked for me. It like pinged all the things I love about science fiction, the grand scope
and history,
the history, the sense of awe. There's a mystery and a kind of strange alienness about the worms.
Yeah.
The spice, the prescience, and
but I'm talking specifically about the storytelling,
the storytelling style. Yeah, I think that it's. There were times where I agree that it was a difficult read, but that didn't mean that I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, 100%. It made me work for it.
Yeah,
and I liked that. And that's not like I'm not saying I don't like current fiction. I do. And I love getting into the head of a character, and I love Krell's Third, and I really love first person. But this sort of touched really serious, the history lover in me and the religion, the person who's interested in religion. It really touched a lot of spouts for me. So if it was just a little more inaccessible and stilted than I would normally read now, it didn't bother me because it worked for this particular book. It worked for this particular story. While there, in the hands of a less talented writer, it wouldn't have worked. I would have been pissed.
Agree 100%. I just want to, you mentioned Asimov, and as I was reading this, I was like, oh, this has very similar themes to Foundation, right? Because someone has a prescient vision of humanity's fall and has to do something to preserve it, which I thought was an interesting parallel. It was also, I noticed that at one point Herbert says that the Bene Gesserit are afraid of artificial life extension, that they have the power to adjust their
internal chemistry,
enzymes and whatnot to live, artificially long life, even beyond what spice enables. But they don't do it because they know that humanity would turn against them. And what's interesting is that Leto chooses to actually do this in the end, to extend his life. So I wonder,
Yeah, but he's got worm powers. Nobody's fucking with that giant worm god.
No, but I mean, he does say that it's going to end badly for him. He does say that.
Actually, when our panel, I think it was on our panel on Foundation, I had come across a reference where somebody on the internet claimed that Frank Herbert got the idea for Dune by reading Foundation, Asimov's Foundation, and saying, what if the story was told from the point of view of the mule? And I tried to find confirmation for that, and I couldn't. But if anybody knows anything about that, let me know, because I thought that was a really interesting idea.
Two other cool things that I liked about this. I love that, you know how Herbert at the beginning of each chapter he has a little quote from a book or whatnot, and you have the one where you find out that the historian Hark al-Ada is actually Faradin the whole time, and I thought, oh, that was great, because we've been reading these quotes all along, and then Faradin saying, well, my true interest is history, and I should have figured that out from the beginning, but then at the end he's like, I'm going to rename you Hark al-Ada, and you're like, oh, that was so cool.
I didn't get that.
Me neither.
Yeah, and then and then the other thing I will say is Atreides house ferrets.
Yeah,
that is crazy. I that's awesome. They actually have trained house ferrets. That's amazing.
And messenger bats.
And messenger bats. Yeah. I think I'm hoping, so you're talking about world building stuff, these little touches. One of the things that somehow always excites me when I read about it is Ix. And one, I love that it's named Ix because it used to be the Roman numerals for 9, and they just forgot, and now they just call it Ix. And it reminds me of that line in the Lynch Dune where the guild navigator goes, many machines on Ix. But like what they, I think, allude to here is that Ix is using technology and like is skirting the lines between like, the Butlerian jihad, prohibition against computers. And I want to know more about that. I know we got some Laxu in the last book, and I just think there's something about that that's mysterious and interesting. And I want more of that external world coming through, because we get, this is a very Dune centric book. We get people coming in who are Bene Gesserit. I mean, Jessica only. And then we have Duncan, who's a Mentat, but we don't get a lot of the guild isn't really there. We don't really get these external things. So I'm hoping the next book has a bit more of that stuff, because I think, I agree that I think I've said it before, Herbert, like Lucas, is a master at creating a world efficiently with these like just sometimes simple strokes that evoke these huge vistas. But I do want to explore some more of that stuff beyond Dune itself next book.
All right, so we are like way over time, so we need to wrap this up. But we'll be doing more. I guess we're all on board for God Emperor of Dune, so we'll have more to say about that. And then the plan is we're also going to be reviewing the Sci-Fi Channel Children of Dune miniseries, and of course Dune Part 2, which will be out, I think, March 1st. So everybody, have those to look forward to. But I think we're going to have to, for the moment, I think we're just going to have to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Rajan Khanna. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Matthew Kressel, and Rajan Khanna for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks, or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.